Okay, good morning, everyone. And well, I should say good afternoon to our friends in Nigeria. My name is Heather Asiala, and I'm the Communications Program Manager for the Pulte Institute here at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. On behalf of my colleagues here at the Pulte Institute and at the larger university, I'm delighted to welcome you to day 2 of Populorum Progressio, the Catholic economic alternative as an elixir for the Nigerian economic crisis. If this is your first session with us, then welcome. If you are returning from yesterday, welcome back. We are delighted to have you here for this discussion. Today, we'll be continuing the seminar with Father Fidelis on the principles of Catholic social teaching. Before we get started, I would like to remind you all that this is a hybrid event. So we do have guests joining us both in person in Nigeria and virtually here on Zoom. So please be respectful of your fellow guests by muting yourselves throughout the session. And we, of course, appreciate your understanding and patience if we do have any technical issues arise throughout the session. I'm available on chat if you have any issues or questions throughout. If you do have questions for our presenters, please do leave a comment in the chat box, and we will try to address as many questions as time allows at the end. And with that, I will turn it back over to Father Fidelis to get us started.
Thank you, Ether. Once again, I join Ether to welcome each and every one of you to today's session. We will run the schedule today like we ran it yesterday. I will make the first presentation for 30 minutes. We'll have a breakout session. I will introduce the question we will be discussing on, especially for those of us who made attempts to read the document we went through with yesterday. Then for the second session, do another 30 minutes, and we'll do a little bit of group, or we turn it over to a group that met this morning here to look at CST and wealth creation. If Father Joseph gave anybody my document, please. Is there anybody here with a document from Father Joseph? You can just get that document for me, please. Thank you. The media, I want my screen to remain shared, so don't interfere with my screen, please. So today, we're going to look at a document, Populorum Progressio, but before doing that, it's important to look at some other related documents, especially the non-Christian document that also seems to be saying the same thing that the document Populorum Progressio is talking about. So I'm beginning with a question. Is there a connection between the Christian faith and also economic justice? That is the attempt that the Populorum Progressio is trying to make. Is there that connection between the Christian faith and economic justice? So the Pope produced the document in 1967, released, in 1967, Populorum Progressio. And he was following more of the tradition that began with Pope Leo XIII. You remember, yesterday I talked about the Catholic social teachings, beginning from the work and the document released by Pope Leo XIII in 1891, Rerum Novarum. The content of that document also was reiterated about 40 years later by Pope Pius XI. Some aspect of that document also was reiterated somehow later by Pope John the 23rd in the Mater et Magistra. Is there a way you can share my screen? Can my screen come here? So the question is this. If we're talking about human development, which we can say it's a literary translation of Populorum Progressio. Populorum Progressio means the development of the people, And today we can as well change that to mean human development. The major obstacle to human development is poverty. And as you and I know, that the problem of poverty has become reasonably endemic in our country, Nigeria, and also Africa. MBS statistics shows that 40, as of 2019, that is before the pandemic, says that about 40%, 40.1% of Nigerians are poor. That is not just poor, are absolutely poor. What standard does the MBS use? That is National Bureau of Statistics, the Abuja outfit, the Nigerian outfit that takes care of, the information, the data, Nigerian data about poverty. So what did they use? Before talking about what they used, World Bank used the data that says that anyone who lives below $2 a day is absolutely poor. Not just poor, absolutely poor. So there's absolute poverty, there's relative poverty. The MBS kind of mirrored that of the World Bank and uses $1.90 a day. So the MBS and the World Bank seems to be saying the same. And the NBS kind of argued that the reason is that seems to be the standard use, that seems to be the standard method of measuring poverty. But there are some other theories that seems to have done better than what is done by MBS and the World Bank. How do we measure? How do we say that someone is poor? How do we qualify that? How do we qualify that someone is poor? How do we deal with that? There are two approaches that I'm just going to mention them a little bit. I'm not going to bore you with their details. There is this maladjustment theory by a late Malawian professor, Tandika Nkandawire. I think it died about 2 years ago. He used the maladjustment theory. The maladjustment theory is very reasonably close for those of us who have heard the name before. I mean, those who are in economic studies, those who are in development studies, or those who are interested in economics. The name Amartya Sen must have crossed your mind or something. If you have never heard about him, it doesn't really matter. I would explain what he said. So he came up also himself, and another lady called Martha Nussbaum came up with a theory called the capability approach. So the capability approach is simply about we cannot measure poverty only by $2 a day or $1.90 a day. That is just an income, right? There is so much about poverty that goes beyond income. And income in itself is instrumental. Nobody has money just for the sake of having money, right? You have money to be able to use it for something. So it doesn't make sense that someone has money and he or she cannot access so many other possibilities, which is real. That there may be that money and they're still incapable to access some resources of well-being. So capability theories would say that, no, you can't just use income. And moreover, it's also misleading to say that to be absolutely poor is $2 a day, because that means that the moment you are able to earn $3 a day, $4 a day, you are no longer poor. And as I know, that will even work in Nigeria, right? It's not going to work there. $4 a day, what is that? It's not going to mean anything. And I think that I've seen over a couple of weeks since I've been around there. So they argue that if the opposite of human development, if the opposite of poverty is human development, then we have to do more to measure poverty. And whatever they are saying, coincide reasonably with, there is this Oxford Poverty and Human Development Institute that now does what is called the multidimensional poverty. That is to say, for us to measure poverty, we have to look at so many things. And by the time I mention some of these essentials, social essentials, you would say that, okay, I think the number 40.1% may be lower. So for someone not to be poor, he or she must have access to clean water. He or she must have access to sanitation. They go together. Without clean water, they can't be sanitation. He or she must have access to good nutrition. He or she must have access to power, electricity. Right. Of course, education, and he or she must have access to good paying jobs. There are two or three other indicators, but I think these ones are good enough. So right now, if all of us here, and those on Zoom, those who are Nigerians primarily, if they have access to like half of this thing or like most of this thing, access to power will be a challenge, right? So, and the moment you lack about two of these indicators, multidimensional poverty would say that the person is really poor. So this seems to be a better assessment. This seems to be a better assessment, to measure poverty. Like I said, we're looking at poverty as that is against human development. So the capability approach would say that for anybody to have well-being, for you to be well, for any child to develop properly, he or she must be able to assess these essentials. It is these essentials that constellate, that come together to give some reasonable level of well-being to the person. Without education, reasonable good education, good nutrition, and all the rest of it, the well-being is difficult, and as such, human development seems to be difficult. So those who do the capability approach, because it's very interesting. Sorry, it may sound a little bit too academic, but I'm trying to break it down. They mentioned, because it's going to be reasonable for us, Nigerians and Africa, why this approach is good, before I go to Populorum Progressio itself. Martha Nussbaum mentioned that there are two levels of this capability. Capability, they mean that when we are able to access all these essentials, the human person is capable to do certain natural human functioning. When a little child is able to access food, a little baby, able to access food, able to access good water, able to access good sanitation, able to access some of those things I mentioned, there is good education. There is a high possibility that the little child would develop properly and the brain would develop properly. So the little child will be capable to perform some essential function. That is the meaning of the capability theory or the approach. So they said there are two levels. One is universal. That is for every human person, regardless of his or her ethnicity, of his or her country, of his or her religious affiliation, he or she should be able to access the basic resources and these essentials. They call this, it's universal. That's the first level. And those that I mentioned, the resources that I mentioned just now, they form the universal level. Everybody should be able to go to school. Everybody should be able to access good food. Everybody should be able to access good water. Everybody should be able to access power. And some of those ones that I mentioned, it should be basic for everybody. And these people would say that this is debatable. Arguments all over the world. But those who do the capability approach will say it is the responsibility of a government to make sure that every citizen accesses all of these resources. And there is now the secondary level. The secondary level of the capability is that how do you now make use of these resources when you've been able to make your choices as an adult or as a teenager or someone growing? In other words, I'm going to reframe what I've just said. Sounds confusing. The first level of capability is that for every human person, for every human being, he or she should be able to access those resources that will make him or her grow very well. When he or she, and those resources must be provided by the government. And when he or she is now capable to make choices, whatever he or she does with his choices is his own choice. So that is the second. Duty of the government to decide what I do, what you do with your freedom. In other words, freedom cannot be guided. As soon as it is guided, it is no longer freedom. So for the capability approach, when government provides, when the community, let me use the word community, not necessarily government, when the community provides these resources, the community does not determine, rather allows the beneficiary of the resources to choose how he or she uses those resources for his own good. That he determines what is good for himself or herself. That is when we can say that the person is free and is developed. Is that the Populorum Progressio idea of development? That is what we'll now get into. Two years after the Second Vatican Council, which ended in 1965, Pope John the 23rd began the council, but died, and Pope Paul VI, who was during the council, the Cardinal Giovanni Montini, Battista Montini, became Pope and continued and completed the council, Second Vatican Council. 1967, he released a document which we've been corrosing for the past few years, Populorum Progressio. Now, what is the background of this document? He didn't just release the document because he needed to release the document. There were some things that informed it. The economy of the world had advanced. The economy of the world had grown as of 1967, that decade. The economy of the world had improved. Far away from what happened just immediately after the World War. The World War, you remember, recession, depression, everything. But 1967, the economy had advanced, industrialization had grown, so much is going on. As a matter of fact, United Nations named that decade the decade of development. And also, there is an advancement in communication gadgets. So much was going on. But also, within what was going on was the fact that some people were still poor. The fact that some people were still poor, despite the economic advancement, was also corroborated with the fact that there were still some problems within Europe, of course, at that time extended, let me say, in the West at that point. There was also the Cold War. There was also the economic war. There was also the separation of the eastern part of Europe and the western part of Europe. And of course, there was also independence happening in this part of the world. Nigeria has then had gone into civil war. I guess civil war was when? 1967. 1967, yeah. Nigeria as at then, maybe was preparing to go to civil war. The document was released March. So much was going on. And then these things that were going on were impacting the lives of people. And as such, the Pope thought it wise that it was important to put up a Catholic narrative, a Catholic idea of how the human person should develop and how there should be economic justice. But that is not all. There was an evolution of a new way of thinking about the human person, what I would call new humanism. Remember yesterday, I said that one of the first principle of the Catholic social teaching is the dignity of the human person. The human person is so central to the whole idea of the Catholic social teachings. So as at the 1960s, there was an idea of how to begin to think about the human person, the new humanism. The works of the people like Jim Possart, was very prominent. However, the new idea of humanism did not just start with Jim Possart and some of his colleagues, no. It had started centuries before. Without wasting so much of the time, but for those of us who may have heard the word, who may have heard the name Immanuel Kant, who may have heard the name René Descartes, who may have heard the name Auguste Comte, who may have heard the name Friedrich Nietzsche, the ideas of these people who deviated reasonably, who propounded a new idea of how to think about the human person, had become renewed and was influencing and was being influential as at the 1960s. Mind you, before these people, the whole idea of being human was what I described yesterday. The material and the immaterial coming together, the composite human person. And the person, the composite human person, understand that his dignity is because that he or she is the image of God. And he also understands that because that he came from God, everything he or she does in this world will be in view of where it's going to return to God. But that had changed. That had changed. An idea of the independence of the human person had become more pronounced. This was also part of the thing that was going on in the 1960s. But also, as this was going on, there was also a resistance by some thinkers of the church who were also arguing against what they understood to be the new humanism. The works of a good number of them are French. I don't need to go into that. But if you have heard the name Jacques Maritain, Emmanuel Mounier, Jacques Maritain seems to be more known in our world than Emmanuel Mounier. But these were the things that these people were doing. Now, that was all that was going on as at that time. Also, Pope Paul VI, before he became the Pope, had a reasonable international experience. He was a nuncio. That means he traveled a lot. After return to the Vatican, he was also an Archbishop of Milan. And there were, according to history, there were some part of, with being an Archbishop of Milan, he confronted or he saw firsthand so many issues of poverty. And of course, because of his travels, because of his international experiences, he reasonably saw poverty of people in the midst of growing economy. So these were his influences, and as such, he came and thought of there is need for us to begin to change how we think about economy. So this information may not be so important, it will be helpful. This last information I really want to give, so that before we go into the details of the document. Who writes an encyclical for the Pope? Remember yesterday we talked about the encyclical. But who writes an encyclical for the Pope? Who writes that big document? Sometimes close to 60, 70 pages for the Pope. There are popes who wrote it themselves. As in, they sat down and they structured and wrote it themselves. At least two, we saw them. John Paul II, Benedict XVI. This John Paul II was a philosopher and humanist who used his personalist idea, that is his own interest in defining the person. And he, as a matter of fact, his first encyclical, Redemptoris Omnis, he introduced his thoughts to the church. He's going to be talking about how the human person should be viewed. Of course, Benedict XVI. Some other pope in history definitely must have written their own encyclicals. But some other times, especially with the Populorum Progressio, you have what is called the ghost writers. The Pope introduces this idea. Some experts come together. They begin to draft. They draft the document. The Pope reads it, maybe with his committee or with his team. They go back and forth. And when it's ready, the Pope releases and he signs. Even though ghost writers, who wrote eventually? The Pope wrote, because it's going to be a signature, not the signature of the ghost writer. If, as a matter of fact, if I have not done research, I wouldn't have known there are ghost writers, as you may not know, right? So the Pope eventually wrote his document. But the document, the content, often are the ideas of the certain Pope. It took 3 years to write Populorum Progressio from 1964, and it was released in 1967. The ghostwriter is named a Frenchman, and of course, the first language of this document was the French, unlike some other document whose first language was in Latin. So it was first written in French before translated into Latin. So a good number of Frenchmen came together to write this document, and one of them also, who influenced the writer, was Jacques Maritain that I mentioned. But the primary writer was a Dominican priest called Louis-Joseph Lebret. He died before he finished. He died, I think, in 1966, thereabout. Maybe, I think he must have finished the draft. And there was Cardinal Petro Pavan who completed the process. Like I said, it took 3 years, for them to complete it. Reasonably. This is the background of the document. So what I've said is this. There is an idea of human development beyond the Populorum Progressio, definitely. And of course, tomorrow, there will be a lot of thoughts that will be shared as regards that. But Populorum Progressio, even though its thought and ideas align with so many of these theories, secular theories, there is one thing is primary to the human development of Populorum Progressio, as we will see in the next stage. For everything that we own, for every material things that we possess, that we use, for every freedom that we have, it is for a purpose. And the purpose is for you and I to use it in view of where we came from, which is heaven. So there's this concept that the eternal destination of all goods. And every human freedom must be conscious of that. Every material use must be conscious of that. This simple thing I've said, it sounds simple, but very important because it differentiates the Catholic idea of human development from all other ideas of human development. I will conclude the session with this little thought that I shared with some people yesterday, and I think one or two of them should be here today. And I was saying that I was trying to think if the economic narrative of the church permits being a billionaire, how many Dangote can we have in the Catholic Church if the economic principles are really put into practice? Why is this? The Catholic economic narrative permit and support reasonably comfort, no doubt about it. There should be the human comfort. As a matter of fact, some people go as far, as a matter of interpreting St. Thomas Aquinas, that we need, which is reasonably correct, we need reasonable level of comfort to practice virtue. And one of the things that the society is made for is for the practice of virtue. And you need comfort to practice virtue. So in other words, income, money that can afford you comfort is good. Good. However, your comfort is for a purpose. So how much of comfort do you need to be able to achieve your purpose? And I give an example. You need a car, good car for your comfort. You need a new car. A new car is better than an old car, right? For your comfort. But do you need a limousine for your comfort? That's the question we will talk about before the next 30 minutes. So right now, we have a 20 minutes break. Then before we go into the document, bit by bit, to do the analysis of the document. So like we added yesterday, let's form in sevens, and we have 20 minutes. Please let us stop when it is 20 minutes, when I call your attention. Thank you. Let us start the group discussion now.
Populorum Progressio.
Populorum Progressio.
Populorum Progressio.
Populorum Progressio.
Populorum Progressio.
Populorum Progressio.
Good day. My name is Bishop Jude Ayodeji Arobundade, the Catholic Bishop of Ondo Diocese. The Church, at all times and in different generations, have been very concerned about human development. And in the encyclicals of the Church, it has always captured the essence of human development, especially the Populorum Progressio, which practically means human development. The encyclical of the Church have been particularly interested in human development. So I want to encourage everyone in our diocese, especially at this time in Nigeria, when so many people are out of job and they are not able to take care of their basic needs, that we must take advantage of this program in Ondo Diocese.
We understand human development to be integral. In other words, it must be human, biological, economic, spiritual, and social. We hold that every human person, regardless of their religious and ethnic affiliations, is entitled to this development. And that is exactly what we intend to do in this summit, in this conference. We intend to articulate these principles of human development, engage with development and economic experts and policymakers, and of course, the Nigerian people.
Father Fidelis, can you hear me?
So let me know if you can see my screen, please.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right, so we will do something right now. Have equal here. There's been something interesting that has been going on in the various groups. And we choose one person in a different group, one person for 1 minute to articulate the various opinions. If there are two, the two opinions from your group. I think it's better we start from the Zoom. Let's start. I think there are two groups in the breaking room. You have two breaking rooms, right? Ether?
Yes, we had 2 rooms in the Zoom breakout. So we had room 2 and room 3. So if we could have a representative from room 2 share a minute of what the overall opinion was in your group.
One minute, please.
And if you need a reminder of who was in room 2, we have Dr. Twins, Olufemi, Tieho, and Warola. Apologies for the pronunciation. Would anyone like to share?
Sure, I'll go ahead. My name is Tieho Machibalele. The answers were, there was a spectrum of answers whereby we all agree that virtue is something that we believe that everyone should display. But some very compelling answers were provided. So I can't start my video because my bandwidth is really bad. I got cut off earlier and had to come back again. But the situation is that, sometimes the human flesh and the environment push people to go back to their primal inclinations. So there was a case of genocide that was provided, and so people may, protect themselves with firearms if, there's a case of genocide. Sometimes when a nation, is recovering from war and food is scarce, people will steal food. But again, there's, the conclusion that if you do believe in the word of God and you know that you only have about 85 years on earth, then if God serves you this bitter cup on earth, you have to believe that you have to continue being virtuous. And if this is, the way that you will die here and inherit the kingdom in the hereafter, then you just have to be obedient and be strong. So that's just my position in the group.
All right. Can we have the second group? 1 minute, please. Thank you.
So the second group was room 3, and in room 3 we had Anastasia, Elijah, Father Charles, Olamide, Valentine, and Vivian.
Yeah, good evening from Nigeria. I'm Vivian. So in our group, we concluded that sometimes we need to consider can you hear me, please?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Sometimes we need to consider the economic situation before we can talk of virtue. Hello?
Go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
It is difficult to be virtuous in an uncomfortable situation. And this means that when you're not comfortable and you're talking about virtue, it doesn't go any, and it goes on contrary. It is contrary to each other. That one has to be sometimes that we should consider the economic situation before we talk about virtue. At least sometimes there are some things that one has to have before we can talk about that. The level of comfort helps us to move from survival to living. Sometimes it's better if you thrive in a situation. But when you're just trying to survive, it is different from actual living. Many Nigerians are still at the stage of just surviving and has not even started living. What do I mean by living? Having basic amenities of life, like what I said in our group. Like what fathers taught us this evening speaking from Nigeria, I mean evening, then it can be morning in the other side. So this means that in ensuring our survival, the practice of virtue becomes low. We are talking generally here, but when you're talking about Christians that are conscientized, then being virtue has nothing to do with economy. It is inborn. It is in you. It is what your Christian life has taught you. But when survivor is ensured, the practice of virtue becomes easy. That is, in a situation, let me just just create a scenario. In a situation where a child has not eaten, it happened somewhere in Nigeria that there's no food in the family. The woman had to take one of the child to market and left the child there and said, please give me a small cup of rice. I forgot my money at home. Let my child stay with you. I will go and bring money. She went home, left that child, and she was eating that gari. Gari, I don't know what that is called. Is gari. You can call cassava flake. I don't want to call it that. Gari is what we know it for. So they were at home eating and left that one because he's a bit older than others and she can find her way home. It was later that the seller cannot see the woman. She had to take that child to police station and she was traced back home. And they found out that that's what they have to eat. Even the policeman and the woman that is selling Gary had to take pity on them and give them something. This is how bad it could go. And if one is in this situation, how does virtue have to play? Yes, Father?
Yes, so that we can take order.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello.
It was very helpful. Thank you. So
you're welcome.
Can we maintain 1 minute, please? Yes. Can we run the group here, please? 1 minute. 1 minute. Can come from your space. I think there's another microphone.
Yeah, good evening, Father. Good evening, everyone. All right. So from my group, we agreed that virtue should be independent of comfort, but attributed to some basic indicators. All right. And we picked education as key. It could be informal or formal. The human person has a choice to make, which means if you need job, shelter, food to be comfortable, before you can practice virtue. At times, you will agree with me that some of these basic indicators are actually dependent on each other. I can leave my shelter to an unknown area just in search for job. So does that compromise that I shouldn't practice virtue when I go in search of jobs? No. So we agree that the man or the woman has a choice to make. And you must, at all costs, practice virtue. Choose to practice virtue, irrespective of the level of comfort. Thank you.
Well, in my group, we thought of using the gospel as a basis to practicing virtue. And basically, we agreed that once I have a place to stay, I have the basic means of livelihood, I should be able to practice virtue against all odds. Thank you.
Yes. Good evening, Father. Good evening, and co people. In my group, we discover that the issue of comfort and virtue are relatively different things. You can be comfortable without having the virtue of giving. We saw in the scriptures the wealthy man, the rich man, and the issue of Lazarus. Despite being very rich, he found it difficult to recognize the pitiable condition of the poor Lazarus. So when you think of virtue, that rich man is comfortable enough to give. And essentially, man, the human being, must fulfill obligation to the other. Understand the other person, make friendship, and work together to build the society. So when you also talk of comfort, you discover in the scriptures of the boy who gave out the 5 loaves of bread and the fish, which our Lord Jesus Christ multiplied to feed the multitude. You discover that the comfortability of the boy is relative in this sense. He might not be rich, but that virtue of giving to make comfort for others was inherent in his psyche. Then you discover the widow who had 2 coins. So essentially, to be virtuous, we don't have to be comfortable. We don't have to be comfortable. You might be comfortable and will not give out. And somebody might not be comfortable and still willing to give. Thank you.
Good evening, Father. Good evening, everyone. In the group, we attended to the question, what level of comfort is needed to practice virtue? We traced this discussion or this question to our discussion yesterday, where we talked about the person, human being, the dignity of a person, and of course, how that shapes us into having virtue. We also discussed the relativity of being virtuous as a person, that it's the virtuousness that you're chasing or that you're looking for or you're hoping to attain that will actually define the level of comfortability that you're going to attach to such virtuousness. And if someone has been sharpened, as we discussed yesterday, and then the person has been able to attain a level of dignity, then the subconsciousness of the person has been divined as the person is growing up. So when the person now finds in or herself in a situation, the virtuousness, the dignity that has been invested in the person's subconsciousness, we actually define what comfortability it will need for any situation that he finds himself, either religious, in the secular society, or otherwise. This we submit that this will actually define the level of comfortability we actually need as a person. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was good to hear you. Let's now hear what Paul said. If you have the text, I want us to we'll go briefly around it. The Populorum Progressio, you were given the text yesterday. If you have the text, let us look at number 26. Sorry, number 6, I mean. Number 6, their number. Number 6 of that document. That has the summary of the old document, the kind of the narrative that the document was trying to promote. So in the copy that you have, you should see that they said, today we see Old English, right? Men, they called men here. So today we see men trying to secure sure food supply, cures for diseases, steady employment, the demands of every human person. We see them trying to eliminate ill, to remove every obstacle which offends man's dignity. They are continually striving to exercise greater personal responsibility, to do more, to learn more, and have more so that they might increase their personal worth. And yet at the same time, a large number of them live on conditions which frustrate the legitimate desires. Pay attention to the legitimate desires. Pay attention to do more. So the number 6 is saying that it is a natural human inclination and a legitimate one to kind of seek for more. It is legitimate that every human person wants more. It is reasonable and legitimate. The second part of that number 6 only goes ahead to mention what has been mentioned in number 6. But the other part of the document now goes to show how it is impossible for some group of people. Pay attention to the Pope saying it is a legitimate desire to want more. But how the more will be curtailed and what are you going to use the more for, I think will be mentioned at the later part of the document. So let's go to number 12. Some people have been denied the legitimate desire. That is the point of the number 12. So it is legitimate for everybody to want more, to want to do more. But some people have been denied the legitimacy of doing that. The poor people. And if not, about 50% of Nigerians have been denied that. So the Nigerians fall, a good number of Nigerians fall into that very group. So the Pope saying here, the Pope saying that true to the teaching of Jesus Christ, the gospel, which is the good news. The Pope referencing the gospel here, it is not to spiritualize poverty. That is to say, the gospel replaces that legitimate desire. Rather, is to show that it is the mission of Jesus. It was the mission of Jesus Christ. It is the church to now pay attention, to now give preference. I think Sisters of St. Louis will like this very next line of words. To now give preference to those who have been in that desire. The Sisters of St. Louis, you still use it, the preferential option for the poor. From the concept became coined, I think in 1979, but its foundation are here. The Latin American bishops, that is the South, those in the South America and Mexico. The Bishops' Conference, called CELAM, in 1969, I guess, met in a place called Medellin and used Gaudium et Spes, used Populorum Progressio, some of the members of the church, to use the gospel, to read the signs of time and think about the problem of their people, the poverty of their people. Latin America many years ago used to be what Africa has become today. Military dictatorship, just like we had it. High level of poverty, just like we are having it. Colonialism, just like we had it too, and so on and so forth. So their bishops came together and mentioned the importance of giving attention to those who have been disenfranchised. Again, using this very number 12 of this document. But I think it was in Puebla, the next meeting of the Latin American bishops. It was at their meeting at Puebla that they coined the word, the option for the poor. In other words, for those who have been disenfranchised, who have been neglected, it is the priority of the church to make them priority. So those whose legitimate desires have been denied, like a child in the house, like when children they like every other child. I'm going to go to number 15 and 16 of that document. Number 15 and 16 of that document. Maybe 2 seconds for you to read through. But for the sake of those on Zoom who don't have a copy, in God's plan, every man is born to seek self-fulfillment. For every human life is called to some task by God. Remember, we talk of the eternal destination of all good. Listen to how this sounds. At birth, a human person possesses certain aptitudes and abilities in germinal form. These qualities are to be cultivated so that they may bear fruit. Remember, what level of the bearing of fruit is virtue. Remember, we just talked about virtue. Okay. By developing these traits through formal education or personal effort, the individual works his way toward the goal set for him by the Creator. Two things are being put together here. One of the things that you talked about, what level of comfort do you need to practice virtue? What level of comfort do you need to cultivate fruits that will lead the person to his or her eternal goal? That is the beatific vision, that is seeing God as God really is. So what level? Remember, we move from those who have been disenfranchised. So it is important that those who have been disenfranchised to be given priority. So that also, like every other person who has been enabled, they can also attend education. One of the things that help cultivation of virtue here, the Pope mentioned, is education, right? So, and remember one of the things that we mentioned, indicators of poverty, is education is lacking. And I think some of our schools have become dilapidated. Not just even whatever time the school closes. This thing. You and I know that the only set of schools that provide quality education most of the time are those that are owned privately. So, in other words, with that setup, we as a nation, we are setting up crisis. Why? Because we need formal education. Because private schools are going to be not everyone will be able to afford private schools. So those who have not been, those who cannot afford private schools have been disposed to be denied rather of cultivating the virtue. Not only that will lead them to the beatification, but also for them to be good citizens. And I think whatever is going on as regards security testifies to that. Number 16. Very amazing here. Number 16 is self-development, however, is not left up to man's option, just as the old creation is ordered toward its creator. So to the rational creator should of his own direct his own life to God, the first fruit and the highest good, eternal destination of all good. That is like the question we had yesterday. It's good. I think that English is never going to be correct. So I think let's just leave it at the perfect good. Thus, the human fulfillment may be said to sum up our obligation. That is the end. That is the goal. The other side goes to say, moreover, this harmonious integration of our human nature, carried through by personal effort, responsible activity, is destined for a higher state of perfection. That is exactly what I've said so far. The cultivation of virtue, the comfort that is needed to cultivate those virtues, and the purpose for cultivating those virtues. Let's go to number 20 and 21. Those conditions that should never. Let's go to 21 and 22. Those conditions 10, 21. If development calls for an ever-growing number of technical experts, even more necessary still is the deep thought and reflection of wise men in search of new humanism, one of which will enable our contemporaries to enjoy hope, values of love and friendship, of prayer, contemplation, and thus find themselves. This is what will guarantee man's authentic development. Is transition. Remember, yesterday I mentioned there are some conditions that are not human. Look at what the Pope said in the last slide. From less than human conditions to what? To truly human. Some conditions are not human. They are not meant for human beings. And there is absolutely no reason why we should be comfortable with them. The Pope goes now to mention some of those conditions in 21. What are the less human conditions? The material poverty of those who lack the bare necessities of life. Look at the connection. From the material poverty, it goes to what? Moral poverty. And the moral poverty of those who are crushed under the weight of their own self-love. Oppressive political structures resulting from the abuse of ownership or the improper exercise of power, from the exploitation of the worker or unjust transactions. Tell me which of these conditions are not present in Nigeria. All right. So you see the importance of the Catholic social teachings. We now begin to see, oh, yes, we now know where our problems are coming from. And the Pope is going to conclude that. He's going to say that at the conclusion. I didn't ask you to read it, but I'm just going to mention it a little bit at the end. He's going to conclude why there can never be peace in an atmosphere of underdevelopment. That is, it is not going to work. The truly human conditions. The Pope said, from poverty to the acquisition of life necessities. That is being human. It is not being luxurious. That is why I said, having a shelter, it's just a human condition. Having the possibility of moving from point A to point B without a car checking this way, and without having to call Oga Muti or the Oga that we call in Nigeria. So many of the Oga on our phone log. It's a truly human condition. There shouldn't be a big deal about it. That someone has a reasonable job with which he or she can access the basic thing that he or she needs. It's a truly human condition. And the Pope goes ahead to mention those truly human conditions. In other words, they shouldn't be luxury. They are basic, they are truly human conditions. Let's go to number 22 and 24. This is very interesting because I heard one of the things in joining one of the rooms, there was something interesting that was said. I'm just going to the second part. Now, if the entity was provided and it took for his own program to glean what he needs from the earth, there is a right that Pope Leo XIII mentioned in the example we talked about yesterday. The right to private property. It is a human right to own a private property. As at the 12th century, I'm going to spend a little bit of time here. St. Thomas Aquinas. In the second part of his Summa Theologiae, question 66 thereabout, Aquinas was making an argument. Is it natural for a human person to own something? And Thomas Aquinas concluded that because the human person is a rational human being, is rational, he or she can think. And because of those qualities that human beings have that other creatures don't have, it is natural for a human person to want to own property. And that to own property is legitimate. Pope Leo XIII made that argument in 1891. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas now went further. This is a little bit tricky, and I want to explain that. When someone now steals, in one of the groups, there was a question about stealing. When someone now steals a property of someone, property is anything that you own. House, dog, anything. Yeah, exactly. Anything that you own. Thank you. Anything that you own. So it doesn't have to be house and car. So when someone out of hunger now steals another person's property. Now, pay attention to these wonderful analysis of St. Thomas Aquinas. For as long as the stealing is to fulfill the hunger of the person that is hungry, Aquinas didn't say it's not a sin. Aquinas said it is not a mortal sin. for as long as it is to fulfill the hunger of that person. Why did Aquinas say so? Aquinas said that even though the human natural person, natural mind, rational mind wants to own property, but human being social also are also disposed to own things in common. Because human beings are disposed to own things in common, when someone now hungry now chooses to take your property because he is hungry or she is hungry, he or she, even though has done something wrong, has not really committed a mortal sin. He used mortal sin. Aquinas did not say it is not, yes, and he did not say it is not a crime. However, when someone now hungry, now rob, Aquinas differentiated between stealing and robbing. When someone now hungry, now rob, the person has not only violated the other person, the robber has also committed an act against justice. And an act against justice is a mortal sin. Because he or she did not only take what does not belong to him or her, he or she has also violated the space of the other person. So Aquinas tried to make that distinction. Now, how do we now begin to understand that? Like I said, Aquinas did not say it is not a crime or misdemeanor. No. And the type of thing that was stolen would also determine the level, the depth of that. If an hungry person steals a 500, 400, 400,000 naira worth of iPhone, he or she, the person that has the thief, has not acted because he or she was hungry. He or she has acted because he or she wanted to steal. So it was not a motivation by hunger. It was not a motivation by survival. So that was what Thomas Aquinas said. So talking about private property, what Pope Leo was responding to was, remember, as early 19th century, there was a man called Karl Marx, we heard the name before, who began a wonderful analysis about why religion, capitalism were the problem of the world. And it was of the opinion that until those two things are cancelled, let me use this word, the world would not be normal. I don't want to go into Marxism, but one of the consequences of Marxism was an elimination of private property. So Pope Leo was resisting Marxism, that private property is natural to the human person, using Thomas Aquinas. But Pope Paul VI in Populorum Progressio now embraced that argument. Let's look at second paragraph of 23. Second paragraph of 23. No one may appropriate surplus good solely for his own private use when others lack the bare necessity of life. In short, as the fathers of the church and other eminent theologians tell us, the right of private property may never be exercised to the detriment of the common good. When private gain and basic community needs conflict with one another, it is for the public authorities to seek solutions to these questions with the active involvement of individual citizens and social groups. In other words, the right to private property is not absolute. So when someone owns 4 houses, 10 houses, the Pope is asking the question, for what purpose? How do 10 houses allow for eternal destination of good in a way that 2 or 1 house does not allow for eternal destination of good? And until we answer that question in Nigeria, poverty reigns, and sadly also violence continues. Like I said, I didn't mention this last part, but let us go to number 76. It's really very interesting. Number 76. Number 76 of this document. The Pope said, extreme disparity between the social and educational levels, evokes jealousy and discord, often putting peace in jeopardy. As we told the Council Fathers on our return from the United Nations, we have to devote our attentions to the nations, to the situation of those nations still striving to advance. What we mean, to put it in clearer words, is that our charity towards the poor, of whom there are countless numbers in the world, has to become more solicitous, more effective, more generous. Look at the next paragraph. When we fight poverty and oppose unfair condition of the present, we are not just promoting human well-being, we are also furthering man's spiritual and moral development. Hence, we are benefiting the whole human race. Listen to the next word. For peace is not simply the absence of warfare based on precarious balance of power. It is fashioned by efforts directed day by day toward the establishment of ordered universe willed by God with more perfect form of justice among men. In other words, without social justice, there cannot be peace, right? The other part of the document that I want you to read in your own time, one of the important principles of economics that this document promoted is solidarity. And a good number of African economists have mentioned that. Let's take from Africa. How does a millionaire who owes a lot of money transact business with a mama or Java who just wants to sell, who just wants to get by, and who has not been having customers since morning? The millionaire, so to speak, goes to the yeah and negotiates a cup of Gary. But because the year wants to sell, because no customer has come this morning, right? The power is not in the Yazan. The power of negotiation is in the hand of the millionaire. So the Pope was saying that the trade transaction between rich nations and poor nations put the poor nations in a bad position. Because the one with the money dictates how and how much he or she wants to pay for the natural resources that he or she has taken from the poor nation, taken down to the rich nation, refined and brought back to the poor nation to sell. Like your chocolate, right? So the Pope is saying that for the world to be balanced, it is important for the rich nations solidarity with the poor nations. In other words, what do you sell? Sell this. And the rich nation who has the power is able to pay. Because we find this from a poorly rich nation, we're going to find this at this cost. It's the same material. Then I should be buying this at the same cost from these other nations. The Pope is not supporting the whole idea of grant and grant and grant, because for giving grant is like who pays the piper dictates the tune, right? So solidarity is not just giving of grant to the poor nation, but enabling the poor nations those infrastructures, those resources, to empower them and make them capable of negotiating with their own strength. That until everybody is strong, everybody is weak. And I think the situation in the northern part of Nigeria confirms that. Many years ago, I think that back, a few years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or maybe 7 years ago, the Populorum, it's those it's their problem. Right now, it's not their problem, it is our problem. I wouldn't go into the South American, Latin American examples, but I will conclude our conversation here for tonight. But before we end the session, there is a group that met this morning. If they can have their 2 minutes for their conclusion, and before we end today, before we give the announcement, and if I may be able to take one question, please, just one, or if it's not, then I can take. Okay, please articulate your question briefly. Why the group gets ready?
Thank you very much, Father, for your submission and taking us through all these documents. It's been quite revealing I want to say, for everybody, or personally. My question goes to us. As we actually have it right now, the society that we find ourselves, if not the whole world, we can start going to several examples right now, are acting completely against this document, this Catholic social teachings, so to say. How or what's the plan of this program, of this exercise, towards institutionalizing these teachings, these ideas and concepts into several stratum of education? For example, in Nigeria, we have several head of institutions that are keyed into this particular program and exercise. And also we have several, let's bring it home, several Catholic institutions, both primary, secondary, and universities spread around the country. I would like to know, or I would like to just it to be shared, if there's a way we can actually streamline this document, these ideas, into the curriculum of our schools. Thank you very much.
I'm not really sure if mine is question or contribution. But going through the documents and the interactions have taken place here, I'm afraid for something. My fear is that if we actually want to apply this document, really, it may lead to revolution. And I'm not sure that is the intention of the Pope. But when people, if we really imbibe the spirit of this document, you want to do something with it, you want to do something about it. Although you refuse to go into it, the Latin American experience of it, but if we go it really well, it may lead to a revolution. So the question part of it is, how do we use this document without going that far.
I'll be brief with my responses. First, I think the sponsors, as regards the first question by Emmanuel, I think the sponsors of the program and I will have a conversation after this event. But a very legitimate question, very legitimate desire, and also good enough. We have a principals of schools here, at least one of our schools, if not more than one. One of the things that I mentioned, that the Catholic bishops of Nigeria mentioned, is to attend to that desire, but just that we've not been able to do it. How do we take this to the young ones, to the schools? And I think it's absolutely possible to include this in the curriculum. Until we have the younger ones being formed, their conscience being formed through some of these principles, then we have nowhere to go. So, but one of the intentions of this program is to continue the conversation in a way that we consolidate in our minds and our thoughts this narrative. If we don't talk about it, we're not likely going to remember it. It's only when we remember it that we're able to use them as principles of actions. So this is just the beginning, and it will continue by God's grace. But as regards the school part, it is very, very important. And I think it's something, the conversation that we should have afterwards. So, and as regards your question also, Father, I'm not quoting him verbatim, but it was Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King, that mentioned that, not quoting verbatim, but those who have disallowed a kind of peaceful conversation, so to speak, peaceful negotiation, have made like a violent negotiation inevitable, so to speak. That is not the way he said it, but I'm just rephrasing. What I'm trying to say is that right now, as a country, we're in violence, right? Whether you like it or not. So there is no amount of violence that can be more than this. You know, we're already living in violence, even without the sword or the gun. You only need to have traveled and return and drive on our streets to experience the violence and know that okay, something is not well. So there are no two ways to economic justice if there's going to be peace. There are no two ways about it. So it is important for us, like I said, to sustain the conversation, expand the conversation, use our parish platforms, our schools for the conversation. Then people themselves will now begin to make the changes. And it is when people desire to make the changes that we can reduce the level of violence. But when a small group decide to make those changes, there is no guarantee that there won't be violence. But when the people have an idea that we want good for ourselves, and the only way to want good for ourselves is to build the structure that will enable good, then we will go to the polling booth, for example, vote in a particular way. And when we are disappointed with our vote in a particular way, we wait for another polling system, polling session. We would not compensate, no matter what, those whom we trusted and failed us. Until we begin to have that conversation, it's not going to happen. We're going to be living in this violence. Yes, if I have the speaker for the other group for at least 2 minutes, there's right here. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Father, for this great opportunity. This morning, we met and we first reviewed what we learned yesterday. That's for the sake of those that just came in today. Right. After that, I asked a question. And the question formed the basis for the conversation, which was in relation to the second document we had, which is the Truly African and Wealthy, right? And the question was, I said, in order to practice the development of the human person, that the Catholic Church has to take into consideration the housing deficit in the country, which is a challenge today in the country, right? And then the members of the group contributed towards it. And one notable comment was by Mr. Taiwo, right? Mr. Paul. And he said, it is because the elders have failed, which means the leaders have failed politically. Even our parents, even the people we look up to as mentors, it is because they failed to mentor us properly. That is why the system would not be fruitful. Why? The comment was because I said the Catholic Church should be responsible for driving and for catering for some basic needs, paying attention into the family, most especially in terms of the society, the basic Christian society, which is a composition of families. Now, if the Catholic Church focuses on the basic Christian society, it simply means that the issue of no shelter could be fixed right there. His comment was, is it the church that does not have enough money to even feed that would be responsible for making housing units available for its members? But then I said the church does not mean the priest. The church simply means you and I. So it is from among us, we have the wealthy. What are these people doing? And my argument was that these people would not do anything because there had been no structure in the church that gave them the platform to become who they are. If me being in basic Christian society or young Catholic worker gave me a deed that secured my future, how will I tomorrow not be able to put in resources into making sure that the goal of the basic Christian society or the young Catholic worker is achieved? If the young Catholic Christian worker comes up tomorrow and says they want to build 2 units of 2-bedroom flat somewhere in Obaile, how will I that have or that grew from that platform not be able to do something? So my submission was that the Catholic Church needs to, in a way, set up structures, put down frameworks that guides what our society stands for, not Hail Mary. Hail Mary, Hail Mary will not put food on the table. Who said that? I think it was Father Ari, and Mr. Paul also said that. You know, that Hail Mary, Hail Mary will not really put food on the table. So it is until these units of the church begin to talk progressively, begins to bring the youth together to empower them. You know, this kind of segments, what's it called? Sessions we have, can we take it to the unit? Can it be part of what the unit discusses? Can we have experts? Can the structure be mapped out really, and not just we sit down, say the rosary, then discuss some things that does not really add up to the development of the human person, and then go home. And then you expect me to come back again next week, the same thing, about the same thing, wearing the same shoe, and the shoe keeps degrading, and I'm still wearing the same shoe, and I'm still hungry. Whether I like it or not, the morale will drop. And when it drops, because so we are interested really in the practicality of this. And I have chosen the housing deficit as something that I feel should be looked into for this conference to really yield the fruit. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Actually, I'm going to respond briefly before the announcement because you said something really intriguing. Actually, Hail Mary can put food on the table, depending on how you recite the Hail Mary. You know. That's the first thing. You know. So, yes. And I'm going to use an analysis that was once used by Monsignor Koledoye, who is here today, when Baba Swe was sick. When Baba Swe was ill, and there were, what do you call it now? There were GoFundMe for Baba Swe to get well. And there was a kind of a public shaming of those who failed to contribute to it. And I think in my conversation with Monsignor, I remember that analysis. I'm sure he remembers right now. He said that, I think he wrote an article as regards that. I'm not sure if he eventually published that. He said that the Nigerian celebrities who have a platform to use the situation of Baba, push for a structure that will guarantee access to health for everybody, is public shaming people for failing to contribute so that Baba Swe can be taken abroad for treatment. That they have the platform to push that let's have a good hospital. If we have a good hospital, then we don't need to take Baba Swe outside. Then, so with that, we're not just treating Baba Swe. We are treating future Baba Swe and so on and so on. Using that to say that it is always the failure of system when a spiritual structure takes up the political actions. Political actions is not just APC and PDP shouting. Political actions is organization of people. When the church can and the church should, when there is a failure of system, and that is what the church is doing as regards education. There's a failure of system. The church provides education. It's a different conversation that we may be having that how much does it cost? That's another conversation which may be legitimate. But when the church provides housing units, the system has failed. That is why the church now tries to fill up that kind of a gap. So instead of insisting that the church fills up the gap, there's one responsibility of the church, and that is why we're organizing this: the education of the mind. If the mind in our parish system, if the minds are not educated, civically, if there's anything like that, the civic education, for you and I, for example, as the church, as members of the Nigerian community, to mobilize and ask our governors, why is that road not completed after 4 years? Why is also salary not paid after 4 years? Why is also pension not paid after 4 years? If our church helps to form our conscience as the grand citizens, to mobilize so that, then the church has acted politically according to the way it's been organized. When the church can afford it, when the church has the wherewithal to provide these structures that you have mentioned, that you have talked about, it's because the system is failing. And with what the church will keep providing in the failure of the system, it's not going to cater for everybody. It is not the case that the church is without fault in some instances. But in this very thing you've raised, that is not the way the church to go. When the church does that, then the church is taking up government responsibility and allowing the government to be irresponsible. I think I wouldn't want to say too much about that. But it was a nice deliberation. It's a nice concern, and I really appreciate your deliberation about it. But I think you raising it has also helped us to look at what is it that we should be asking the church to really do. Education of the mind, raising our kids, be politically conscious, to be able to raise important arguments, raise important questions to whoever, to trust and to trust only God and to serve only God and or fear only God, if I can use that word. Thank you. We've gone beyond our time for today. But for this very last submission, makes me want to introduce to you what we'll be having for the next 2 days. I'm sure you are very well aware. And it is important that you are here and you bring others to be here, and you encourage others to be here. From tomorrow, we'll be engaging policymakers and experts. That is where your questions will be relevant. Tomorrow, we are having the Commissioner for Economic Planning from Osun State, Professor Yunusa. The panel discussion will start tomorrow. We have Father Akinwale, and we have Professor Diane Desiato also on the panel tomorrow. And we have some interventions from Owen University, from Elizabeth University, and of course from Motional College. Ether, do you have any announcement before I go further? Would you want to do this? I will conclude. Thank you.
No, I don't have any other announcements. Just a reminder that the Zoom link to join tomorrow's session is the same as today's. I'll also be sending you an email from the Pulte Institute with a reminder about tomorrow's session and a link to view the recordings from today and yesterday. So we appreciate you joining us today and for your participation, and look forward to welcoming you tomorrow.
All right, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you all. I will end the Zoom meeting now, and we'll see you all tomorrow.
All right, tomorrow is 1 p.m., please. 1 p.m. Nigerian time and 7 a.m. Eastern time, right?
8 a.m. Eastern time.
8 a.m.